So today, what I want you guys to take away is a broadened perspective of what's made possible through Cadence on Flow. Like a lot of us are, thinking, hey, Crescendo's upcoming. There's going to be EVM equivalency. I spent the last bunch of time mastering Cadence. Is this going to be relevant into the future? Cadence is something that is more relevant now than it's ever been before. And I'm going to give you guys practical examples in a simple way of what's made possible with Cadence and why it's exciting to use. So let's start. This one's going to be a little bit more interactive. So if you feel that I'm pulling you in to or throwing you under the bus on the spot, that's exactly what I'm doing. So my name is Ali in Vancouver. They also call me the Flow Bro. I studied computer science at the University of British Columbia, where I started going down the rabbit hole with that guy over there, actually. He was the founder of the Bitcoin Club. And I was like, oh, who's this Satoshi Nakamoto? Oh my God, they're using cryptography to actually make a difference in the world. What's going on? Went down the rabbit hole, became a software engineer for a long time, then went down the founder rabbit hole, started a bunch of startups, and now I work as an outbound product manager here at Flow. What does flow mean to you guys? I'm going to open that up. When you hear flow, what comes to mind? Flow state? Okay. What does that mean?
Just the ability to have uninterrupted attention on a particular task.
Awesome. Anyone agree with that or feel a lot of nods? Ability to have uninterrupted focus on a given task. So at its core, what does Cadence offer you? It offers you as a developer, as a user of applications built on the blockchain, the ability to stay in your flow state by exactly what you were saying, removing all those barriers. Sometimes they're UX barriers, sometimes they're technical barriers that just ruin your experience with an application or building one, right? One thing that I really want to highlight is with Cadence, from my perspective, something we unlock is full spectrum flows. This is at the application level. I'm going to go into details, talking about major value propositions and what each of them mean. This is at the function level. This is at the ecosystem level. You're able to have complete flexibility, and you meet developers where they're at in their journey. You meet users where they're at in their journey, whether they're completely new to Web3. They don't know what a bunch of keys are. I have to write that down. My wife is vacuuming. She takes that paper and then vacuums it up, and I'm like, oh, everything's lost. Or oh, what happens if the scan? From every perspective, you have a full spectrum of ownership, from being a complete newbie who someone else controls the assets to wanting to go down that rabbit hole, have your own cold or hot wallet and say, if you don't have the keys, it's not your assets, I want those. From an ownership perspective, from a usage perspective, from a development perspective. Actually, I have a question. How much % of smart contracts do you think are unique? And by unique, I'm talking about code duplication. 1%. 1% are unique. So out of all the smart contracts that have been written, you're saying 99% of them are just copied from 1% of them?
Damn right.
Interesting. Anyone want to throw out any other numbers?
Let's go with the power
80-20. So you're saying 80% are unique or 20% are unique?
20% are
Okay, 20% are unique. Dawood, I see you
I have no
thinking. Okay, guess. What number do you think?
I don't know, 30%?
30% are unique?
Yeah. I'm at
5%? Whoa, we're getting low. Oh, man. We started at 1%. Now we're going down. Flip side.
80-20.
80-20. Okay, you guys like the Pareto principle. I like that. You guys are thinking very logically. So before the presentation, I very lazily went over to Perplexity AI and asked it how much smart contract code is duplication. And it essentially searched the internet and gave a bunch of sources saying things like up to 96% of the 10 million smart contracts on Ethereum that were analyzed had duplicates or were similar, very similar to other contracts. I guess the closest is the 5%-ish. Didn't verify any of this, so check your own data, do your own verification, but I'm not surprised by that number. Like when you go onto Etherscan and you look at the verified contracts, you actually look at the code, like virtually every one you look at is a fork in sign. It's a copy of an existing code that people maybe change a little bit. Maybe they're playing around with it, they're hacking, they're testing. Maybe they want to launch that exact same DEX on another like EVM compatible chain. There's very little, so there's several problems. One is the question of innovation. Open source code is the default in Web3. Open source code is the compound interest of innovation. What does open source mean? It means that when you solve a problem once, it's permanently solved. You solved a problem for, I don't know, creating that calendar app. No one needs to recreate that. You could extend it, you could change it, but people free up their headspace so they could work on other more interesting, more important problems, right? From a software development perspective, it's considered a bad code smell to have duplication in your code. So this is a little bit sus when you see that 96% of all the contracts that are on the network are not actually unique. They're not solving new things, they're duplication. Tying that into Cadence, I want to talk about attachments. A famous anon once said that most developers in Web3 have attachment issues. They just don't know it yet. So what are attachments? The way I see attachments is essentially modding for Web3. Is anyone familiar with modding in video games? Anyone ever like install a mod or, like what kind of mods have you played with or what kind of games have you utilized? Gary's Mod, one of the most famous ones. You could just end up shooting like random stuff at your friends and stuff. All right, maps for Age of Empires. Those are good examples. So what attachments are is the ability to add extra data and functionality without the permission from the original contract author. What this allows you to do, and like an example that I like to give is, has anyone ever heard of Skyrim before? So what is Skyrim? Yeah, it's a part of the Elder Scrolls universe. It's by Bethesda. It was a super popular game that blew up. And one thing about a lot of the Bethesda games is they make it super easy to use an editor. Same thing with Warcraft 3. Like a lot of these games allowed people to use editors to create new levels, create new creatures. One of the most popular games of all time started off as a mod for Warcraft 3. Have anyone heard of Dota before or played it? Did you know that No? What's really exciting to me about modding for Web3 is several things. One of them, has anyone ever heard of The Innovator's Dilemma? No? It's a famous book. So there's a book in a theory called The Innovator's Dilemma, which essentially says that founders and innovators, they will eventually face a problem, even though they're initially successful, where they have to decide, do I double down on the thing that made me innovative and successful in the beginning, or do I take a risk and jump to something completely new to stay relevant in changing market conditions, changing product requirements, like users wanting different things, etc. If I stay with if I stay static, if like a big bank, I took over so much money, Visa, what's it called? PayPal starts coming up, they're making payments even easier, we're a huge ship, do we pivot to that or do we continue doing what we're doing? You don't keep up with the times, someone does something better, the startup ends up taking a huge amount of the market space. You have that problem. Do you take a huge risk? Do you target a smaller market? Do you do something like that you could end up failing your business altogether, or do you stick with the thing that was successful, which will make you go obsolete over time? It's a dilemma every innovator will eventually face. The amazing thing about modding and attachments is that it essentially solves the innovator's dilemma for products. What do I mean by that? I'll give a tangible example with Skyrim, which I brought up earlier. If you go right now to websites like ModNexus, you'll be able to see millions of people downloading modifications for Skyrim today, mixing things like Whisper AI, ChatGPT. You could go to a non-playing character, an NPC, and talk to it and say, through your microphone, hey man, that Khajiit over there, do you know where he's from? It will take that text, it will send it to the AI model, it will convert that to voice, and the person will reply to you. All of a sudden, two-dimensional characters become interactive like normal human beings. it makes the game so much more enjoyable to play. It doesn't feel fake anymore. It feels real. Those modifications were made in the last year or so. They have millions and millions of people. Modding allowed the community to come together and take the risk that the innovator no longer has to anymore. Most of these mods will fail, get like 3 downloads. Some of them will get hundreds of millions of downloads. The product continuously evolves, creating new value propositions for the user. That solves the innovator's dilemma. That keeps the product shelf life. Like people are still downloading Skyrim today. After the Fallout series on Netflix, tons of people, or was it, which streaming platform, Prime? Amazon? Tons of people started playing the game again and downloading crazy amounts of mods because they wanted something new, right? They wanted something different. They wanted some better products that the original creators couldn't even foresee in the future. The creators of Skyrim didn't know that AI NPCs would become a thing. Like, they stopped working on it years ago, but millions of people are still downloading and using it because they allowed that extensibility. So with attachments, the same thing. It solves the innovator's dilemma. It allows your products to be super competitive. Plus, all of a sudden, with attachments, you no longer need to duplicate code and redeploy it. You could directly extend existing contracts, functions, functionality, the data, etc., without having to redeploy the original. So you don't change the original code at all, but you could end up extending it and adding all sorts of flavors, new products, value propositions, etc. So a couple examples of this is, from a gaming perspective, you could have gear that is represented as nestled NFTs. Each of these gear pieces could give you perks. Or if you've ever played Witcher 3, you could introduce completely new games within your game, like how Gwent ended up becoming crazy popular and people started printing them and buying them off of Amazon, like physical Gwent cards to play around with. You could create new biomes, levels, talent trees for your characters. From a decentralized science perspective, is anyone familiar with Balaji? So Balaji talks a lot about decentralized science, and he gave a very interesting example of spinach. Who here thinks spinach is healthy for you? No? Sure. Is this an American thing? People don't think that spinach is healthy? Oh, okay, this side thinks. It gives you muscles, because we grew up on Popeyes. This guy drinks a can of something, I don't know what that green stuff is, but then, unnaturally within a juice, where's the AI juice guy? The guy gets juice, he gets super big. And we grew up with this perception that spinach was like a superfood, it's super healthy. But apparently it's not actually all that special or magical. Just someone wrote an article or an academic paper years ago and misplaced 1 comma when he was talking about the iron value in spinach. That ended up making people cite that, and people didn't go back to the original citations or fact check them, whether it's through negligence, whether it's through nefarious intent. There's so many different reasons why someone might give an inaccurate citation, but that could have real impacts on us in our day-to-day lives, right? So we could think of every academic paper in academia as a smart contract. When you're using an attachment to create a new academic paper, you're not detracting, you're not changing the original body at all, you're not changing any of those academic papers, but you're contributing to the body of academia with something new. And people could attach to that and that and that. And it's a really exciting thing that's possible on Flow that you can't, that model's not easy to create anywhere else. From a decentralized finance perspective, maybe you have a DEX, right? And you want to add a new type of functionality using zero-knowledge proofs to preserve people's privacy. You can end up adding a new functionality so that when someone swaps in with one account or one address, it could swap out to another. So from an on-chain perspective, it's obfuscated. With SocialFi, a lot of us are starting to see things like, oh, this politician said X, but that's not actually true, and users are starting to fact check each other, etc. You could create new interesting applications that extend existing SocialFi things to add fact checking, to add new monetization schemes, to create NFTs from posts super easy without having to detract from the original application whatsoever. The next thing I want to talk about is metadata views. Similar to how attachments give you a full spectrum of ability to extend existing products and applications and create new value propositions, metadata views in Flow is something interesting in that it allows you the full spectrum of interoperability at the applications level. You could think of it as, why do we have standards like ERC 20, ERC 721? You need to have something that is standardized and predictable to be able to interact with all sorts of applications like marketplaces or et cetera that's ingesting those assets, right? If every fungible token was made in a completely different way, DeFi protocols would struggle to work with those fungible tokens. If every NFT was made in a completely customized way, how would marketplaces know what to serve, what not to serve, right? Metadata views, the definition that we have for it is the ability to add metadata to tokens that allow for interoperability with applications and adherence to evolving standards. New standards are created all the time. With metadata views, you could have, when you launch your contract, certain fields that are required. That guarantees backward compatibility with everything that's currently existing in your ecosystem, like you're launching an NFT. But what does the future look like? How do you future-proof these assets? What if in the future, what's that Google VR or AR headset called? Google One? Yeah, if Google One ends up launching and then people go back to the metaverse, and all of a sudden you want to be able to walk around in your living room and see your doodles on the wall, right? There's new marketplaces for these augmented reality NFTs. There's new standards that come about where you want to be able to derive information, which type of applications or headsets these augmented reality NFTs are for. Metadata views allow you to dynamically in the future, even years after you've launched your asset, add new optional fields that allow you to adhere to those evolving standards. It allows you to future-proof your assets. Some examples are in gaming, you could, with your token, you can set metadata attributes of the gear, like, oh, this gear gives you 500 defense. From an SEO perspective, you can add information that can help search engines find things better. So maybe one metadata you could add is like, oh, this is for augmented reality, right? This is an NFT for augmented reality versus not. So if I make a new search engine that wants to search through these metaverse assets, I could easily find them. From a DAO's perspective, you could get information about governance tokens. What are the voting privileges? What do you have access to? Is it quadratic voting? Is it a one-to-one voting privilege? From an NFT perspective, you could also set royalties. So what's common practice is I launch an NFT, like Hoodlums. I go to, say, OpenSea, or I go to a marketplace. I set what the royalties are. Someone buys that, I get that royalty, they go to another marketplace, say Blur, they start on OpenSea, they went to Blur. I don't get any more of those royalties that were originally getting sent to me on OpenSea because it's at the application level. With metadata views, it allows you to standardize the information that you want all the different marketplaces to draw from. So every single marketplace can look and see like, oh, 20% of all the revenue from this token, when it gets sold, should go to this receiver address. It changes it so that the information is not dependent on the application. The information is bundled at the asset level, which makes it really exciting to work with. Another example is NFTs with royalties, right? Oh, I already gave that example. Another example is DeSci. So you could associate papers with specific journals or citations if you're going to make a maybe search engine for academic papers. NFT yield perks, like if any of you have ever used IncrementFi on Flow blockchain, like you will notice you can buy an NFT that will give you certain yields just holding on to it. Different protocols, maybe I want to have like an OG collection, so I'm going to sell each of these NFTs for $10,000. Whoever holds it gets 5% plus APY on farms or something like that. You can make very interesting new use cases that create more utility and value for those assets by utilizing these metadata views. Other examples in DeFi include you specifying, fungible token bond expiry dates, option strike price. Maybe, there's one application for bonds trading. Options trading. I have those options there, but then another application where I want to port over those options, and it extends the functionality in some very interesting way, right? You want to be able to maintain that original information beyond the application level. Capabilities. This is a tongue twister because it's like when you're talking about the capabilities of capabilities, it kind of gets a little bit meta. An anon once defined it by looking into the etymology of it as the quality of being capable, the ability to receive, or power to do. And that's essentially what it is. So if I were to give a more tangible description of it, you could think of capabilities. Who here has used like Google Drive folders before? Who here has used IAM access in AWS? You could think of it as access permissioning along those very similar lines. You could specify the resources, the functions, the assets, and give granular permissions to each of them. From a technical description, they're references to shared objects that can be saved for future transactions. This allows you to grant these permissions, you could revoke them, and you could limit them. The easiest thing would be like I have a Google Drive folder. Within that, I have assets like Google Sheets, Google Docs, etc. I might want Alberto to have access to read-only, well, everything on the chain is like accessible, but I want him to have access to some of these assets. I want Hudayfa to have access to others. I don't want either of them to have all of the access. I can very granularly decide who has access to what in whatever way I want. Again, full spectrum flexibility. Examples of this could be if I have a video game, like World of Warcraft. I'm going to go to bed or I'm going to go on a vacation. I'm not going to use my avatar or my character anymore. I want to be able to make money when I sleep. I'm going to rent out my really cool gear that I got from raiding overnight for the last 2 years of my life. My mom was shouting at me all these years. I should have got a job. I'm going to lend out those, show my mom like, hey, I can make money off of this. And while I sleep, I can create more utility for those assets that might be NFTs, right? Another example is in a lot of MMORPGs, there's something called guilds, which has a lot of overlap with DAOs, right? And in guilds, you have different privilege levels. You have like the admins, and then you might have officers, and at the very level, like low, you have like the newbies, the new recruits, right? Each of them will have different perks and abilities. One example might be that officers and admins have access to the guild treasury or funds. Another example might be officers have the ability to organize events, like set a time, a place, the whole guild to gather together. Or maybe they have access to specific channels to discuss things, right? You can granularly define in those governance structures who has access to what and when. Another example is automated trading bots. I want to be lazy. I don't want to constantly follow the market. Maybe I want to create a bot that can only access specific yield farming strategies, only up to certain percentages at a certain time. I don't want it to rug me. I specify all of it. I let it run when I'm asleep, right? You can easily do that with capabilities. One thing that I think is really exciting is the ability of capabilities, I know that's a tongue twister, to unlock the full spectrum of business models. What do I mean by that? With capabilities, you're able to easily create traditional freemium business models that might be very difficult to implement on other chains. You could specify, if the user pays $30 a month, if this subscription is ongoing, all of a sudden they have access to X number of features. If they go to this tier, all of a sudden they have access to all of these. If they're the most basic free tier, then they only have an access to these subset of features. And you could think about this, like all of us use these kinds of applications every day. It's something very intuitive to us. We don't really see those business models in Web3 because they are pretty hard to create. The last thing that I want to talk about is the transaction model on Flow. It is very different than EVM, but it also, at the protocol level, allows for some very exciting use cases. In Flow, Cadence, there's 3 main signer roles. There's the proposer, payer, authorizer. The proposer is the account that proposes a transaction. The payer is the account paying for the transaction fees, and the authorizer can be 0 or more accounts that authorize the transaction. By separating the transaction model into these 3 groups, all of a sudden you no longer need third-party like contracts or tools. At the protocol level, you can unlock full spectrum access to applications and resources in an exciting way. To make it more tangible, you no longer need something, say, like Gnosis Safe to easily set up multi-sig transactions for accessing funds. You can do that at the transaction level. Or setting up an escrow for peer-to-peer token trades. I want to trade this with you, you want to trade that with you, let's put it in that escrow. When we both approve, then the tokens get swapped. Another example, which I'm super excited about, and something that a lot of people, when they first start using Flow, are blown away by. Like, you start using Flow, you download Flow Wallet, beautiful UX, you end up going to an application, and you're like, what? I could sign in, connect my wallet, and sign a transaction instantly, and I never had to pay anything? Like, what? I'm used to, on Ethereum, my friend Hoods tells me, Ollie, this is a super new, exciting game. Come and play with it. You could do these cool transactions on it. I'm like, oh yeah, I know nothing about Web3. I want to ape into that. Let's jump. I want to play with my friends. You go, you see this weird button at the top right. It says connect. You're like, Is that how I sign in? Sure, you click that. It says download some random plugin from the Google Play Store. You're like, oh, okay, sure, whatever. Like you go, you download it, you go through an onboarding process. It tells you, memorize all these seed phrases. What's a seed phrase? Do not lose this or else all doom will be unleashed. You're like, okay. You like look around, you start writing it in Notion and then you read, or your Google Notes, and you read at the bottom of it, do not write this down on your computer, write it down on a piece of paper. You're like, okay. You go, you write it down. You have to go through fact checking because a lot of people don't really write things down correctly. Check that you wrote them down correctly. You go through all of that. All of a sudden, you want to start playing the game. You go back, bam. All of a sudden, you need to have funds in your account to be able to sign a transaction. You're like, shit, how do I do that? Oh, I have to buy this, protocol token. How do I do that? You Google it. You go to some like payments on-ramp. You try to buy it, transaction failed. You're like, what? If you're in Canada like I am, you end up getting on the bank with your fraud department 6 hours later, convincing them that everything's okay. They temporarily allow you to make that purchase. You go buy, purchase, you go back to the game, all your friends are done playing. You're like, what? What is that? With Flow, the average application on Flow uses this unique signer role, like transaction model that we have, to create sponsored transactions that make onboarding seamless. Like I was talking to someone recently who wanted to work with a meme coin on Flow. So they got the wallet, they went, they deployed the contract, they got it listed on an exchange, all without paying a single dollar. And they were like, how is this possible? How am I signing these transactions without having to pay any gas fees? The reason for it was because every application, even the wallet that they used to launch or deploy that original contract, all of them were sponsored using this proposer model. It allows companies to have loss leader approaches. The price of Flow is so cheap that virtually all of these companies are more than willing to take on the fees themselves to provide seamless user experiences for users. That allows for mainstream adoption. Another example is, I don't know how familiar you guys are with multi-call, but you are able to bundle tons of different transactions at the protocol level together. For example, if you wanted to do complex trades, and instead of having to approve each transaction individually, you can do one approval for all of those. You don't have to do approval chaining. That's pretty much it. Thank you guys for going down this rabbit hole with me. I hope that you find Cadence a little bit more exciting to dance with. And I want to turn it over to you guys to ask questions, but also to tell me what you think the future looks like. Was there anything that you heard today that you thought was interesting or exciting? Was there anything that you thought was boring or like, nah, you could do better? I want to open that up to everyone.
I think it was amazing to see the level of granularity in terms of permissions. And it does remind me of AWS's IAM, because you have resources and groups and roles and all that stuff. And yeah, you can't get that level of granularity anywhere else. So I like that one. My question is this built into the protocol layer, or is that like a smart contract component that you can import into your own smart contract?
Which ones? Like
Features, sorry.
Oh, it's all built into the protocol layer. Like we have a set of core contracts. I didn't talk too much about those, but like the transaction model is built in, capabilities are built in. What else did I talk about? Attachments, I have to double check that, but from my understanding, everything's built into the protocol level. See, engineering manager is here right when I need him. Attachments, capabilities, the transaction model, like it's all at the protocol level.
Yeah. Probably a basic question, but is Cadence JavaScript too?
No, it's its own programming language. It's most similar to Move, if you're familiar with that. No. So the idea about it was like, how do you create, and G, correct me if I'm wrong on this, how do you create a programming language that is very intuitive to regular developers, that's ergonomic, that people can start using as soon as possible, and that is, again, full spectrum, as flexible as possible from day one. And when we look, like there's an annual report that goes out by the awesome Solidity team, and they talk about, what are the challenges, or they ask the entire community of Solidity developers, what are the biggest challenges you're facing today? One of the biggest things people say is like, oh, the stack is too deep. Like, oh, like, how do I do this? Like, oh, I have to use experimental Solidity. Oh, like inline assembly could mess up my contract and introduce this. Like like there's all these different versions of Solid. Like we looked at a lot of the challenges that developers were facing when it came to programming their smart contracts and decided like, hey, you know what, creating a new programming language from the bottom up that's purpose-built, that's ergonomic, that's intuitive, that has a great developer experience is what's really needed to onboard and make Web3 engineering, like smart contract engineering, mainstream. So,
And resource-oriented is the key.
first ever resource-oriented programming language. Check it.
And is it, again, just throwing words out there, like event-driven, objective, does it fall within that spectrum at all, or? This is exciting, and I don't know where to put it.
It's resource-oriented, which is another paradigm.
Okay. All right, I'll have to take a look. Thanks.
What do you guys think the future looks like? What are you excited about the future? One thing that I'm personally excited about is, yeah, again, Crescendo is coming up. We're going to be EVM equivalent, but there's also going to be exciting opportunities for you to take advantage of everything that I talked about today and compose, like, on top of those Solidity contracts that you're deploying on Flow with Cadence. So you could take advantage of all of these things and extend your Solidity code in new, exciting, and interesting ways in a very intuitive manner. So those applications, I'm excited to see in the next several months. What's going to come up? What are they going to change? And what are they going to make possible?
You mentioned that the majority of Solidity contracts are duplicates.
Yes.
Do you foresee, and even I think that's like Uniswap, you know what I mean? That's like V1, V2, V3.
Yes.
Do you see a world where it looks more like attachments or permissionless attachments from community and kind of maybe these core immutable contracts just kind of almost being like utilities or public goods and people keep building on top of that? What does that look like?
I 100% think that that's the future. And like as a developer, I've done like back in the developer days, I've done a ton of front end development. And you know, with like Node, you could import all these different modules. I kind of see personally that as the future direction, like with smart contracts. All of a sudden, I don't have to, like I'm not changing those modules that I'm importing into my contract. I'm just using this library, I'm using this library, I'm using this library. I'm able to very dynamically, without having to copy, duplicate, change those original contracts, integrate them and build new applications that extend them in exciting ways while making them more relevant in and of themselves. So I do think the future is going to be a lot less of what you see on chain is duplication. A lot more of what you see on chain is raw innovation.
But I guess you mentioned the video game kind of modding model, but the game developer still has to maintain that game somewhat as opposed to a smart contract that just lives on chain, right? Like,
yeah.
So that's interesting. Let's see what will happen.
Because it's immutable, and then it's like they're not going to maintain it, but it just works forever. And then it's like that's an interesting perspective.
When Near Protocol had a programming language. I mean, they were using Rust, but they had their own SDK and everything to build smart contracts directly on Near. But when Aurora rolled down, all the economic activity went to Aurora, and Aurora is an EVM-based chain.
Yes.
So something interesting happened with Near. All the smart contracts that use the whole DeFi money and everything, all the capital went to Aurora, but then the language itself, like the Rust and SDK that they were using, became hyper specialized for building custom chains. So compared to Avalanche C chain and the subchains and the pair chains, not pair chains, not subchains, pair chains. Polygon also has subchains. So kind of like the programming language layer that they started off with, the Near, it kind of became like this networking layer for other chains. Do you see that happening?
I think that's definitely a direction that things can go in the future, where Flow essentially becomes like the data layer, and using Cadence, like you could end up creating at the protocol level without even needing to import like specific modules or code, very common workflows. I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen, but I do think that a hyper specialization in one vertical, like maybe at the data level, is something definitely possible. And part of that reason is because Like one of the interesting differentiators that we have that I didn't touch upon today is around our node architecture. We've created a very modular, full spectrum of modular design in our node architecture, where there's hyper-specialized nodes focusing on different things that allow for very interesting levels of scalability. So there's a lot that could potentially happen, and we're exploring all the different exciting use cases.
Just thinking about like what's exciting potential, the attachments of modability.
Yes.
I'd love to see a Flow Niantic partnership to have Pokemon and Pokemon Go, and then us being able to just create our own worlds, like regions and gyms and stuff, in the style of the games or cards that we experienced, rather than being just focused on the style that the creators created.
Yeah.
Because I think we all have different experiences with Pokemon, whether it's like Pokemon Ranger, the actual mainstream games. That would be amazing to see if Flo could pull that off. Yeah.
Pokemon Flow. You should trademark that. No, I'm joking.
Which, AR, and then I mean, Pokemon Go is, I think, one of the best applications of AR, right? Maybe. And it would be nice to see, like, the Pokestops used to pay, I think people paid to have their location on the Pokemon map.
Right.
It would be nice to see that with other, I mean, with travel, you can see it. Sorry, that's the wrong way to put it. In the travel space and in tourism.
Yeah. No, I've been looking at putting AR into it, but I'm not sure how it applies with Flow. But
Everything can potentially flow. Full spectrum, though. I don't think you heard about that part. But I'm super bullish on that modability narrative and attachments. I do think that a lot of brands and companies have not fully recognized the product value of allowing people to access and modify and extend their code, right? Like that modability, like out of all video games, how many of them encourage people to mod their games? And part of it is like a lot of times, like I still think a huge amount of education needs to go to the big brands themselves to showcase why this helps them financially in the long run and from a product evolution perspective. Right now, I think a lot of founders are worried that, hey, if I make my code open source, if I allow anyone to extend it, that could dilute the brand, that could like take it in different directions. I might have a lawsuit. What if someone does something funky with my thing that might be like illegal, or like I want to protect my brand. I want to protect my IP. And they have the bigger the brand, the more the army of the lawyers saying like, beware people taking your IP, right? All of a sudden, like you go on to Skyrim, you can download a mod that will turn every NPC into a Simpsons character. Was Simpsons going to sue them? Like, what's the legal IP aspect of that? From the users, like, oh, I love Homer Simpson. I'm just fighting a bunch of Homers, right? Like, it's great. Like, more and more people are using the game. But then the original people that made the Simpsons aren't getting paid for that mod. But also the creators are not getting paid. So in their mind, it's like, why is this happening? But I think that's the wrong way of thinking about it. I think the right way of thinking about it is its potential to solve the innovator's dilemma, to extend the shelf life of those products, to create new, exciting revenue streams, to create strong communities, because you're empowering your community. You love the product. You're equipping them with the tools to shape the future of the product themselves in exciting ways, right? I think we need a paradigm shift before we could fully extract the innovative potential of modding, not only for Web3, but for everything.
All right, we have time for one more question.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much.
Yeah.